This story tells the story of George, a retired man and owner of a small family business who entrusted management to his son, but the son sold the company behind his father's back. The story raises issues of trust, family values, and responsibility. George, a 70-year-old entrepreneur, spends his morning as usual flipping through the newspaper and enjoying his coffee. A phone call breaks the peace. It's his accountant, Michael. His voice trembles. George, I just got the papers. The business. It's sold. There's been a mistake, George exclaims, pressing the phone to his ear. He is sure that the accountant has made a mistake, but Michael explains that all the documents are correct. The sale was finalized a few days ago. George feels a wave of coldness run through his body. This is impossible. His business is his life's work. How could this have happened without his knowledge? George hangs up the phone and anxiously recalls the last conversation he had with his son Alex. Only a month ago, Alex asked him to sign some papers. Then his son said, "It's nothing, just a formality for the bank." He signed it without even reading it because he trusted his son. Could Alex really do that? George thinks, and memories of how he built this business from scratch overwhelm him. Every step, every sacrifice was aimed at creating a stable future for the family, and now it's all gone. George immediately calls Alex. His fingers tremble as he dials. But the receiver is silent. His son does not answer. He calls Michael again and asks him to send him all the sale documents. Studying them, George sees his signature. Everything looks legal, but it only adds to his pain. A few hours later, Michael calls again. George, I checked everything. The business was sold to Westcorp. It happened last week. George freezes. Westcorp is his main competitor, a company that has been trying to drive him out of business for years. Anger, despair, and betrayal mingle in his heart. He entrusted his son not only with his business, but also with his legacy. Now it is all lost. George decides to find out the truth himself. He's going to find Alex and make him answer. But is he ready to hear what's behind the sale? George grew up in a small town in Ohio. His childhood was humble, but he always had ambition. At the age of 25, he decided to start his own business on a small appliance repair shop. The first years were difficult. George worked 12 hours a day, often delivering goods to customers himself. Over the years, his work paid off. The workshop turned into a chain of stores specializing in the sale and service of appliances. This business was my life, George recalled, looking at old photos. I built it for my family to provide for their future. Alex, George's only son, was smart and ambitious. Since childhood, his father had been involving him in business. "You're going to run this someday, son," would say when Alex helped him put the goods on the shelves. But there was always tension between them. Moab and Alex dreamed of more than just continuing the family business. He was interested in technology, investment, and modern startups. "Dad, this business is outdated. We need new ideas," he often said. For George, business was not only a source of income, but also a symbol of family values. "We have to be honest with our customers and support each other," he would often say. Alex, though he respected his father, had a different vision. He was interested in quick money and risky investments. One of the biggest conflicts occurred a few years ago when Alex proposed to sell part of the business to invest in cryptocurrency. "It's a risk, Dad, but I'm sure it will work," Alex said. We can't play with what I've been building my whole life," George replied. After that fight, Alex distanced himself from his father for several months. But he eventually returned, promising not to interfere in decisions that could jeopardize the business. When George turned 70, he began to think about retirement. "Alex, the time has come. You have to take responsibility for the business," he said. George believed he was putting the business in good hands, but at the same time, he had doubts because of previous disputes. Michael, an accountant, had worked with George for over 30 years. He was not only an employee, but also a friend. "If anything goes wrong, I'll tell you right away," he promised. There was also Susan, the store manager, who often mediated between George and Alex in difficult situations. George is revisiting moments in his life, remembering how he entrusted the business to his son. But was it the right trust? George was sitting in his office, reviewing the documents that confirmed the sale of the business. Each paper seemed like a knife in the heart. How could this happen without my permission? He muttered, wringing his hands. His first thought was to call Alex. George dialed his son's number, but the calls went unanswered. After several attempts, he decided to go to his home. George found Alex in his apartment. His son looked tired, but did not seem particularly concerned. Alex, we need to talk, George began. Sure, Dad. What's wrong? Alex looked surprised, but his tone was tense. George laid out the documents in front of his son. Oma, what does this mean? How could you sell the business without my knowledge? Alex looked away nervously. It was necessary, Dad. We couldn't afford to continue operating. We? Who's we? George asked, feeling anger building inside him. Dad, I couldn't keep the business the way you left it. The market has changed and there are fewer customers, Alex explained, avoiding direct eye contact. George couldn't believe it. Why didn't you tell me? We could have found another solution. Or you don't understand how hard this decision was to make, Alex replied, but his words sounded more like an excuse than an explanation. George began to suspect that it wasn't just about business. Something about Alex's behavior was strange. Alex, is there something I should know about? He asked. His son was silent for a few seconds and then said no, nothing important. But George saw Alex nervously fidget with his wedding ring. It was a gesture he always made when he was lying. After the meeting with Alex, George decided to turn to Michael, the company's longtime accountant. Michael, did you know about this? He asked when he met his friend in his office. Michael looked confused. George, I tried to contact you, but Alex assured me that you knew. How could you let this happen? George was outraged. I had no choice, Michael replied. Alex said it was the only way to avoid bankruptcy. George began to realize that his son was hiding more than he thought. Why hadn't Alex told him about the financial difficulties? And was selling the business really necessary, or was there something else behind it? George returned home feeling devastated. He looked through the documents again, trying to find clues. Or what else is he hiding? He asked himself. George couldn't calm down after his conversation with Alex. Everything pointed to the fact that his son was not telling the truth. One morning, while looking through some old papers in the office, he found an envelope with an unopened account. What's this? He muttered as he read the document, which showed the company's large debt to the bank. This envelope opened the door to even more investigation. George realized that the business was not as stable as he had thought. George decided to contact the bank with which the company had been dealing. The manager who had worked with Alex was willing to meet with him. Mr. Green, your son approached us with a request for debt restructuring a few months ago. The manager explained. Restructuring? What debt are you talking about? George was dumbfounded. The business had significant debt that needed to be paid off urgently, otherwise you would have lost everything, the manager said, trying to be tactful. Why George couldn't believe it, or why didn't Alex tell me? George immediately went to see Alex. He couldn't wait any longer. Alex, I was at the bank. Why did you hide the debts? He asked, his voice pained. Alex looked cornered. But Dad, I wanted to fix it myself. I thought I could find a way. Fix it. You sold our legacy. George's voice began to tremble. Alex began to explain how he had tried to keep the business going, but costs were rising and revenues were falling. He took out loans, hoping the situation would improve, but the debts only piled up. Dad, I didn't want you to find out. You trusted me with the business and I let you down, Alex said with remorse. And that's why you decided to sell it behind my back. George was furious, but he could see that his son felt guilty. Alex admitted that he had to sell the business to avoid total bankruptcy and save the family's reputation, but he didn't know how to tell his father the truth. George asked, what did you do with the money from the sale? Alex lowered his head. I paid off my debts, but it wasn't enough. Now I'm in debt too. That was the last straw. George realized that his son had not only betrayed his trust, but had also put himself in an even more difficult position. George returned home with mixed emotions. His mind was filled with questions. Can he forgive Alex? Or how could he restore his legacy? George decided not to delay any longer. He invited Alex for a conversation in their old office, now empty but full of memories. This meeting was to set the record straight. Have a seat, George said, trying to remain calm even though he was seething inside. Dad, I know you want to talk. I'm ready to explain, Alex replied, looking down. Ada, George began the conversation calmly. Do you realize what you've done? I trusted you with the business I've been building my whole life. Dad, I didn't mean to do this. Didn't know how to tell you the truth? Alex replied, his voice beginning to tremble. You didn't know. You decided everything behind my back. Did you ever think about what this means to me? George remembered how he used to work nights, building the business from the ground up, and how proud he was to pass it on to his son. I remember when you were a little kid helping me pack boxes. You always said you wanted to be like me, and now what? George's voice grew louder. Alex lowered his heading. Dad, I did want to be like you. But I made a mistake. A mistake. You sold everything. You didn't even give me a chance to help. George could no longer hold back. Suddenly, Alex snapped. You've always been perfect, haven't you? You never even noticed how hard it was for me to live up to your expectations. George stopped, shocked by his son's words. You think it was easy for me. I tried my best to make sure you had a better life. Alex never gave up, but you never asked me what I wanted. You just decided that I should be like you. The conversation turned personal. They began to recall past conflicts that had remained unresolved for years. You don't know how hard it was for me to run the business knowing that I could let you down, Alex admitted. And you never even gave me a chance to help you, George replied. His son's words struck him. He realized that their conflict was not only about business, but also about unresolved issues between them. Silence followed. They both looked at each other, realizing that their pain was shared. What now, Alex? What are we going to do? George finally asked. I don't know, Dad, but I want to fix this. I can't get the business back, but I can get your trust back if you let me, Alex replied. George thought about it. His disappointment was still there, but he could see that his son was genuinely sorry. I'll think about it, Alex, but know that it won't be easy to fix this, he said as he left the office. George could not sleep well after the conversation with Alex. He was heartbroken, but he needed to understand who the new owner of the business he had invested his entire life in was. He went to the old office to meet with the lawyer who might know the details of the deal. Mr. Carter, tell me straight up who bought my business, George asked, holding back his anger. The lawyer nervously adjusted his glasses. George, I don't know how to tell you this. The buyer is Henry Barkley. The name sounded like a blow. Henry Barkley was George's old rival who had tried to destroy his business more than once. Henry Barkley. Are you kidding me? This is the same Henry who has been trying to steal my clients for years. The Dima. George was outraged. Yes, the deal was done through his company. But there is something else you should know, the lawyer said, handing over the documents. The documents stated that Alex received a substantial amount of money for the business. It was much more than George could have imagined. Why didn't Alex tell me about this money? George asked of himself as he looked through the papers. George began to dig deeper. He found out that Alex had spent most of the money he had received on unreasonable expenses, luxury travel, a new car, and even risky investments that had gone bad. George couldn't let this go unanswered. He decided to meet with Henry to understand how he had convinced Alex to sell the business. Henry, I know you've always wanted my business, but how did you convince my son? George asked as he entered the competitor's office. Henry just smiling. George, it was pure business. Your son came to me himself. He was desperate, and I seized the opportunity. He was desperate. Why didn't you tell me? George clenched his fists, trying not to lose his temper. It's none of my business, George. Your son made a choice. I just helped him realize it. Henry replied coldly. George returned home full of anger and pain. He felt betrayed not only by his son, but by the whole situation. How could you, Alex? You sold the business to Henry Barclay, George exclaimed as Alex walked into the room. Alex replied, looking guilty. Dad, I had no choice. I was in debt, and I didn't want you to know about it. You spent money on stupid things. It's not about debts. It's about your irresponsibility. George could not contain his emotions. Alex began to make excuses. I wanted to fix everything, but I didn't know how. Henry offered a quick solution, a quick fix. You've destroyed everything I've built. George found it hard to even look at his son. Dad, I know I messed up, but I can't bring back the past, Alex said, his voice sad. George was left alone in the room, full of doubt. His son had betrayed him, but he also saw him as the same person he had raised. George sat in his favorite chair by the fireplace. The documents with all the details of the deal were on the table. His thoughts revolved around one question: how could the son he loved and raised do this to him? I always dreamed that Alex would continue my path, George thought as he looked at the photo of them opening the first office together. His heart was torn between the desire to keep his family together and a deep resentment. The next day, George met with his old friend and business partner Mike. You have to decide what's more important to you, Georgig, your son, or justice, Mike said, listening intently to his story. But how can I forgive such a betrayal? George asked, filled with anger and doubt. Mike put his coffee on the table and answered quietly. We all make mistakes, especially when things are hard. The question is whether you can give him a chance to correct them. George returned home and gathered his strength to talk to Alex. His son was already waiting in the living room, looking guilty. Dad, I know I messed up, but please give me a chance to fix it, Alex said, looking down. Amana, how are you going to fix it? The business is lost. The money is gone. You didn't even consult me. George's voice trembled with pain. Alex raised his head and said quietly, I'm ready to start from scratch. I want to prove to you that I can be better. After the conversation, George went to his office. His thoughts were torn between the desire to protect his principles and his love for his son. If I forgive, it will look like I've given up. But if I don't, will we lose each other forever? He asked himself. There was an old book on the table that Alex had given him for his birthday. On the first page were written the words, "For the best father who always believes in me." George decided to turn to his sister Martha, who had always been the voice of reason in the family. You've always been tough, George, but don't forget that you've made mistakes too. Maybe it's time to show Alex that family is not only about business, but also about support, she said. But how can I trust him again? George asked. Trust is built step by step. You can give him a chance, but set conditions that show he is ready to change, Martha advised. The next day, George invited Alex for a walk. They walked in silence through the park until George stopped and said, Alex, I've decided to give you a chance, but that doesn't mean that I've forgotten or forgiven everything right away. You have to show me that you're trustworthy. Alex looked confused, but he replied gratefully, Thank you, Dad. I will do my best to prove that I can be better. George returned home with a heavy heart, but hopeful. I didn't know if Alex could fix the situation, but he decided to give him a chance. George woke up earlier than usual. The sun was shining through the windows, flooding the room with warm light. He was holding a piece of paper, a draft of a new action plan. It wasn't just about business or money. It's about my legacy, about what I'm going to leave behind. George thought as he looked at an old photo of him and his son opening the first store. George decided to meet with the new owner of his business. It was a longtime competitor, Richard Brooks, known for his tough management methods. I understand what happened, George, Richard began, but this is my business now, and I have no intention of giving it back. I'm not here to ask for it back, George replied. I'm here to offer a partnership. Richard raised his eyebrows in surprise. You want to get back in the game. I want to use my knowledge and experience to help build on what I've created. That evening, George gathered the family around the table. Alex looked tense, but George decided to start the conversation calmly. "I have made a decision. And it may seem strange to you," he began. "What have you decided, Dad?" Alex asked. "I'm not going to bring the business back. Instead, I want to start something new. But this time, we're going to work together." Alex looked puzzled. "Together? You trust me after all this?" "It's not a matter of trust," George replied. "It's a matter of learning and responsibility." George explained his idea to create a small family company that would focus on what they did best. "We will start from scratch, but now each of us will bear our share of responsibility," he explained. "What if I let you down again?" Alex asked. "That's a risk I'm willing to take," George replied. George started working on a plan. Alex joined him and they spent long hours together discussing the details. "Want you to understand that this is your chance to show that you can be the best," George told his son. "I won't let you down, Dad," Alex replied firmly. The last scene shows George looking at the old building where his business used to be. He smiles, realizing that his life is changing. It's time to move on. He says quietly. The audience is left with the question, will George and Alex manage to build something new? Will the son be able to live up to his father's expectations? Is it always worth giving a second chance? Or can betrayal be the beginning of something better? What would you do in George's place? Write in the comments! And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new stories. Hey,